Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media. It is Wednesday night and it is in conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi, on this Wednesday evening, where we tackle a whole host of issues, current affairs, global issues, local issues as well. And I think tonight's broadcast is going to be quite interesting because we are talking about the mushrooming or the rising Afrophobia, xenophobia, call it what you want in this country. And clearly, there's a lot that is playing out behind the scenes. And when one looks at this problem, even internationally, where one looks at the creation of chaos to destabilize a country, to destabilize a government, it is well documented geopolitically. It is a framework known conceptually as strategic chaos or unconventional warfare. We could even call it hybrid warfare, because this is clearly a strategy that involves sometimes state or even non-state actors deliberately orchestrating disorder, chaos, unpredictability as well. And again, where is this actually going to, and who is behind this? Because at the end of the day, the government becomes a target to weaken the government's authority, and also sometimes pushing it towards collapse. And this is what we are talking about tonight. And we have assembled quite an interesting panel to discuss xenophobia in South Africa. And the question we are asking is there a hidden hand in stirring this chaos? We are joined by Sharon Ekambaram, who is the head of Refugee and Migrant Rights Program, Julie Eccles, who is an activist, writer, and a political organizer, Professor Mthunzi Mdwaba, global investor and entrepreneur, and Professor Loren Landau, who is at the Wits Center for Migration. My guests are all up on screen. To all of you, to you, Sharon, to Julie, Prof. Loren, and Prof. Mthunzi, good evening to you. Welcome to the show, and we do appreciate your time.
Good evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Sharon, in fact, I'd actually just like to begin with you as well, just to provide an overview and putting into context what we are witnessing. And I have painted a brief picture in terms of the instability that exists in the country at this point in time.
So I think what we're witnessing is a very worrying phenomenon of the actual framing of illegal migrants, illegal immigration. And there's more and more evidence and reports of how this is constructed and fueled by unregulated social media platforms, but also by the mainstream media in the way in which they use this hatred and this othering and xenophobia with sensationalism that is good for their ratings and is in the end of the day good for profits, especially for multi-tech companies like Meta and Amazon. But the problem is that it is opportunistically feeding off a very real, serious crisis that's facing South Africa, and that is the inequality and the poverty and levels of starvation that are, unlivable. And we scapegoat migrants for this, and in that way deflect from holding the state to account.
Well, Sharon, I think it's a very, very interesting angle. I don't think many of us actually have been thinking about the social media angle, and you spoke about Amazon and how this is actually profit-driven. So, I haven't seen much of that actually come to the fore, but it is quite an interesting angle, which we can explore a lot more. Julie, I'd just like, obviously your take on what we are seeing. We'll just have a brief introduction, and we will then proceed to Prof and to Prof Mthunzi as well.
Yeah, good evening. I concur with what Sharon has said. This is, a constructed crisis. It's an artificial crisis, and there is evidence to back that. I mean, in 2020, there was a report by Digital Forensics on some of the social media accounts like Ulerato Pillay and, Sfiso Gwala, and these popular accounts that showed that they're not organic, they're constructed. They are fueled by some or other monetary source They're highly coordinated. And this resulted in over and over again hashtags trending like "Put South Africa First," like "Zimbabweans must fall," etc. And we're seeing the second wave of that now. And there's been another digital forensics report that shows that again, that there are forces behind this. And we should be looking at political parties that have openly supported March and March, such as MKP, Action SA, Inkatha Freedom Party, and Operation Dudula, which the name itself, Operation Dudula, is hateful. And we need to be looking at how smoothly they incorporated their support for this very quick movement that has sprung up very quickly in the past year. And we should be looking at whether there is some kind of funding pipeline or some coordination behind the scenes and what they have to gain from that.
Thank you, Julie. And Prof. Loren, how does one actually read into what Julie described as artificial, but also at the same time, it is strategic, it is well documented. And I think when one looks at a sudden rise of an organizations like March and March, for example, it does raise a lot of questions, because if it is well documented, this must be a plan that has been long in the making.
Right. I mean, I think everything that Julian and Sharon have said is true about the way in which social media has amplified these messages, the way in which this is a result clearly of monetary interests, political interests, working in and outside of the country. But I think we can't deny that there is a legitimate concern among many South Africans about immigrants. This is something that started on the streets in the 1990s and was brought to the fore by local leadership. So it's not cooked up entirely from outside, but I think we do have to recognize that that has played an important role. I might also add that this is not just from social media. If we listen carefully to Cyril Ramaphosa's speech about the budget, we go back to his speech on Freedom Day, he has also naturalized this connection. He has condemned the xenophobic violence, the vigilantism that is destroying so many communities, but he immediately pivots to saying, but I hear your pain. I hear how immigrants are causing unemployment, how immigrants are causing problems with schools, with housing, with water even. These are things that he's naturalizing. It's become so mainstream that we can no longer just say it's these external factors, it's social media, it's these groups. It has become imbricated. It is so much now part of the South African political discourse that you hardly need to amplify it at all.
Yes, Prof. Thank you for that. And let's just get to Prof. Mthunzi as well. Prof. Mthunzi, I think just to look at how vulnerable this has actually made South Africa, because this is now the biggest talking point. This is the biggest news in South Africa at this point in time.
Well, thank you very much. I firstly want to agree with all my colleagues that, there is an artificiality about this. It's constructed. It is very complex on many levels, really. Sharon mentioned the sources that she believes are responsible. Julie also mentioned where she thinks it comes from. Professor Landau, also mentions that, there is a fundamental kind of reality about it as well. But I would also go as far as to say there's also countries that don't like us, like, for example, the US. In my view, I would also would not put it past other countries that are trying to fuel the problems on the ground. But I also want to go back to the mischievous use of the words, the sensationalism. Xenophobia, for example, in my view, is an incorrect label for what is happening. Because, if you break down, sometimes you need to break down things to simplicity. Xenophobia really comes from xenos, which is a stranger in Greek, and also phobos, which is a fear. And there are no South Africans that fear anybody from the African continent, or that fear strangers of any kind. I think let's start there. The word in itself is mischievous. There's no xenophobia. There's no such a thing. Secondly, let us try and not generalize about migration or immigrants. Let's talk about illegality. Illegal immigrants is really the main problem for me, because everybody who's legally here, yes, may get caught in the crossfire by accident, but the main target is the illegality. And if you look at all the countries, Ghana, for example, if you follow social media, because I have quite active accounts on social media, on X, on LinkedIn, on TikTok, you will see that the very countries that are accusing us and that are coming and repatriating their people, they themselves are busy screaming on the streets that they don't want illegal immigrants, Ghana being one, Nigeria being another. So this is not only a South African issue, but of course, South Africa is always in the spotlight. But one other thing I want to say just lastly is that you will remember that we have a history with these kind of third force patterns, whether it is during the just pre the 1994 democracy, when we had Fees Must Fall. I was chairing the University of the Western Cape at the time, and we knew that within our university and many other universities, there was a third force that was fueling things beyond Fees Must Fall. And that's exactly what's happening now, and we can unpack it later.
Well, certainly, Prof. Mthunzi, we certainly will unpack that, because I think that is one of the key angles that we will be focusing on as well. But just coming back to you, Sharon, and one can understand that in South Africa, the frustrations are genuine in terms of what we actually see about us, around us. And also, I think when one looks at the levels of unemployment, the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, millionaires and billionaires springing up. And this seems to be a worldwide problem. And it is definitely a worldwide problem. But again, coming to what we see around us, and Julie alluded to some of the political parties. And when I spoke about, in my introduction, when I spoke about actors, both state actors and non-state actors, because this is exactly what we're seeing, is many of these parties that Julie alluded to. I recall in the build-up to the national election as well, the whole question surrounding migration, illegal migrants. I know the PA was very, very vocal on this. Action SA was vocal on this as well. But just looking at how this is actually filtered down from political actors to non-political actors.
And by non-political actors, are you referring to the vigilante
March
groups?
in March, Operation Dudula, the like, yes.
But I agree with what Julie says. I think March in March is very closely associated with the MK party. Operation Dudula, their leader has now gone and joined Action SA. So there is a very opportunistic relationship between these vigilante groups and the political parties that are xenophobic, but have also taken a very strong stand against South Africa taking Israel to the International Criminal Court with respect to the genocide taking place in Gaza. So these are the politics that is informing the hatred that's being fueled. And I just want to underscore that it is targeting predominantly Black people from the African continent. Why I would disagree with the professor about whether this is xenophobia or not is that it is exactly the same phenomenon that is taking place in America, keeping out people from South America who happen to have a brown skin or a black skin. It's the fortification of Europe to keep out Black bodies from Europe. And we are seeing then a similar weaponization of nationalism and targeting Black people. But I think the thing we should be talking about, because there's no human being is illegal. There are undocumented migrants, and there's very good reason why they're undocumented. I can sit here and speak to you for the next hour about the difficulties that refugees and asylum seekers have, people coming from Somalia, people coming from the DRC, people fleeing countries like Tanzania and Uganda because they are persecuted based on their sexual orientation, fleeing for their life, and they get rejected for refugee protection in our country. And there's a serious crisis of documentation of the asylum system, which is dysfunctional, if not has institutionalized xenophobia. So what we should be talking about is why is it that there's this convergence by political parties, including what used to be the ruling party, blaming the migrants for our social ills. And I think that the success of this xenophobia and the emergence of the vigilante groups is that we're all failing to hold the government to account for the corruption that's taking place, the looting of resources that should be going towards addressing the severe inequality. We're the most unequal society in the world. And that is located in our past. It's located in colonization, and it's located in the apartheid past. But this government has a constitutional obligation to transform South Africa, and it has failed 32 years, and we've not seen transformation. And so I think that's the discussion we should be having, because most research confirms that migrants, in whatever form, documented or not, make a positive contribution to a country, if not just in terms of the fact that as a country, our gift is our diversity to the world. So, I feel very uncomfortable that we fall into this trap of talking about the migrants, because that's what the political parties want. That's what the African National Congress wants, because then we're not talking about Tembisa and the billions that has been looted. We're not talking about Charlotte Maxeke Hospital and the money that's been stolen, and that poor working class people are suffering the consequences of a health system in crisis and an education system in crisis. But it's easy to blame the migrants for that problem with unsubstantiated information about millions of people who are illegal in our country.
Well, absolutely, Sharon. And I think, one can actually unpack that in a lot more detail in terms of what you've said. And one cannot agree more in terms of what you are saying, because together with that, the state of joblessness, we've had, so many talk shops over a period of time to address the unemployment problem in this country. University students that are walking the street that can't find jobs. And, putting all of that into perspective tells us that we have a much bigger problem than just the issue regarding migrants or the migrant problem in this country. But Julie, just to come back and just to unpack what we are really talking about, and to look at migrants who are seen to be a threat, a Zimbabwean gardener, a Malawian laborer, a Mozambican construction worker, a Congolese shopkeeper, a Somalian. Now, all of these people are actually being blamed as invaders in this country. They are denounced for consuming our resources in already, our overcrowded infrastructure, whether we're talking about clinics, we're talking of hospitals, we're talking of schools, and all of this is creating that hysteria as well. And these are people that are taking our jobs, because that seems to be the common theme. And just your thoughts, Julie, when one unpacks this to this level, where ordinary people who are looking to survive are being scapegoated and targeted in this manner.
Yeah, absolutely. Joseph Goebbels said that if you tell a big lie and you tell it often enough, it becomes true. This movement that we're seeing, this hateful movement, is completely irrational. We know that people are suffering. They have a lack of healthcare. Clinics are overcrowded in Gauteng, etc. The reason for that is because, as Sharon pointed out, the systemic failure, the stealing and looting of billions by our government, which could build multiple clinics and staff them and equip them, several times over. We don't have an overcrowding problem in the country. We have a problem of resource distribution. We have a problem of inequality. We have a lot of money. We have a lot of resources. And we're not using those resources. We're not using our wealth to look after people and ensure that their basic human rights are met. There are other countries with much, much more people, with tens of millions more people than us. China has 1.6 billion people, but they don't have the unemployment problem that we have. A migrant and a South African, can equally contribute to the economy, can equally spend in the economy. But for some reason, you know, a migrant becomes a criminal or an illegal person, as if they're not really human, as if they're not really, you know, also making perfectly good contribution in this country. But this framing is absolutely convenient for billionaires, right? We had a very lively debate going on, a national debate about land redistribution, about universal housing, about a jobs guarantee. You know, all of these things are possible, but suddenly and conveniently, the debate has shifted to migrants who are not in office, who are not billionaires, who are not in charge of this country. And I want to give maybe just one or two names that we should be looking into. And one name is Martin Marshall, who is a billionaire who made his money from online gambling, which is a very predatory industry. And Martin Marshall has donated to quite a few political parties, but he's donated at least 40 million to Action SA, a party that doesn't even have, you know, a seat in parliament. A very small party, but that is incredibly vocal and incredibly active online and in the media space, and has become like this larger than life voice. And Martin Marshall is an Israeli billionaire and a dyed-in-the-wool Zionist. You know, he has aspirations to turn South Africa into whatever his vision is, which is a country that would be run by a coalition of Inkatha, Action SA, the DA, and you know, the SA DP. So, I mean, the SACP. So he's written about this. He's quite open about this, and it's quite interesting that conveniently the conversation has shifted away from the ultra wealthy who are making these kind of political donations, and I would suggest that the other entity that we should look at is the billionaire Zulu royal family and entities like that, who also seek to benefit from these kind of not just xenophobic but tribalistic divisions, because the Zulu royal family derives its power not from the state, not from votes, but from ethnicity. And we've seen that after the March and March sort of terror campaigns that have gone around in KZN, now you have Pakulim Tekati and Nkunu going around and extorting protection money out of shopkeepers and so on, exerting their power over communities. And at the same time, they're being gifted 700,000 Rand vehicles from attaches of the Zulu royal family. So we're seeing a convergence of all these right-wing influencers and the ultra-wealthy. And, you know, the victim at the end of the day is not just migrants, it's also poor working-class South Africans who have to bear the brunt of this system at the end of the day and who are being fooled into a false campaign that makes them hate their neighbor at the end of the day.
Well, Julie, I think that's very, very powerful and a very profound argument that you've actually put forward. And I think it's something that, Prof. Loren, that one needs to delve in a lot deeper, because on the one hand, you have got a government, you have got political parties that speak endlessly about transformation, about equality, about anti-colonial solidarity. And when they speak about poor Africans, or they speak about them being attacked as a result of xenophobia. But on the flip side, and Sharon alluded to this as well, where we are a very, very unequal society. And when one looks, for example, Cape Town, for example, which is so detached from South Africa at this point in time, and when one looks at the wealthy class that obviously have huge investments in Cape Town and are moving in as well. So that seems to be acceptable, because it appears as if governments and also political parties are actually terrified of confronting wealthy Western interests, property developers that come into the country, tourism operators. These are the like that come in. And again, South Africa seems to have an appetite for wealthy foreign investors rather than looking at the poor migrants that come into this country.
I think that is absolutely true. But I think if we're looking at who the government is afraid of confronting, It's the South African people themselves, and it is the people who are governing townships across the country. They are unable to come into spaces, whether it's in Tembiso or whether it's in Motherwell or any number of places where we've seen this sort of violence across the last 2 decades. They're unwilling to come in and hold local authorities accountable. They're unwilling to come and charge an Induna with fostering violence. So yes, they may be working on behalf of or aiding international capital, political leaders, but I think the real fear is about what it means if they actually got on the ground and had to confront South Africans and say, we're here, we're going to break up the war with the groups who control your townships. We're going to actually enforce our laws and ensure that South Africans and everybody else pays taxes, follows the laws, builds where they're supposed to build, doesn't sell drugs. I think this is the real fear from that side of government. It's not about whether they offend the international elite. That's there for sure. But I think the South African government knows that what is going to undo it is not the international community, it's its own people.
Yes, Prof. And also, Prof. Mthunzi, when one looks at the problem that we are discussing, this seems to be a recurring problem. It's an ongoing problem because it's every now and then where it rears its ugly head. If we haven't learned our lessons from the 2021 riots that had taken place, and we haven't even recovered from those riots at this point in time, and now that what we are seeing, we're talking about the March on March, talking about June the 30th as well. And if we haven't recovered from 2021, if we haven't learned any lessons from 2021, will we ever learn if we allow this type of situation to continue?
Well, firstly, I want to say that every colleague of mine today has touched on some very important aspects. But I am going to go back to Sharon and say I refuse to accept that South Africans are xenophobic. There is no such a thing as a South African that is xenophobic. That, for me, as a principle, is not accepted. Tribalistic, as Julie talks, yes. Ethnicity, yes, because it comes from our socio-historical, structural challenges that we've always had. That's how the Inkatha was born. It came out of being Zulu. The ANC, people will say it came out of being Xhosa, but actually it was both Zulu and Xhosa. So there is those, the National Party, the DA, all of them come from splinter groups within the diversity of who we are. But we are in a geopolitical complex and polar world. So there will be opportunists globally and locally. I'm happy that Julie's mentioned, the Israeli elements in this, because you must remember, we're not very popular with our pro-Palestine stance as South Africa. We have countries that we know are being looked after by countries like the US, by Israel, countries that are deliberately going out of their way to make South Africa look bad. You pick these messages up all over social media, even people from those countries who are saying, this is cooked, it's not real. But having said that, though, let us also pay attention to how this came about. And how this came about, Prof, other than the fact that there's always a third force being opportunistic and fueling these things and looking at how they can leverage it to their advantage. The fact of the matter, as colleagues have said, we have an economy that is failing its people. We have an economy that does not result in job creation. We have an economy that is not competitive at all. From a competitiveness point of view, if you look at the last 14 years, from when, 14, 15 years, we used to be like number 44 out of 63 countries in the global competitiveness index. We are now number 62 out of 65. We're almost touching the barrel, right? Then we have a situation where the reality of the situation is that we've always had what is called in the ILO. When I was in the ILO and was leading the employers of the world, South Africa was always very topical in the ILO, because when you look at the decent country work programs, we always had deficits of inspectors, where our inspectors have got much, much worse over time. And even when there was supposed to be an intervention during President Zuma's time, all the money was then rerouted and directed into Fees Must Fall, because that looked like a much bigger fire at the time. So things have got worse and have gotten eroded over time. Now, when you look at that, the real reason why you would have the big problems, whether you blame Inkatha or you blame MKP, I think for me, we must stop only focusing on the blame game and the people that are leveraging, and focus on the failure by South Africa, the South African government that is failing its people. And the reality of it is that these are not problems that come up in our suburbs, in our neighborhoods, where I've got people that come from China, or people that come from the Netherlands, or people that come from England. This is not where the problem is. This is not where the manifestation of the challenge is. Even if the people there are illegal immigrants. And for me, illegality is a big thing. Because as much as we get a positive spin on migration, the whole world over gets a positive spin on the people that are immigrants that come into their country. But illegality is illegality and cannot be condoned. And we need to say to ourselves, if we don't have the machinery to be able to do the right thing and create jobs and create sustainable enterprises, and we don't have the machinery to be able to check on who's on the ground and who's competing, the townships, the villages are where our people, where Black people are. See, this is the problem. And somebody was saying the other day from one of the parties, they don't understand why it's always Black against Black. That's not true. Even that is an incorrect label. It's not Black on Black. It's a situation where, from a socio-economic point of view, in terms of poverty, in terms of levels of unemployment, which is because our governments have failed, we are having those people seeing the illegality and the illegal immigrants that are next door to them being the competition, being the people that are taking away their bread. I saw a snippet this morning on X where one of the ladies sells magui, nyafet cooks, the other one sells a bread. And they are saying, since they've driven out the illegal immigrants from their neighborhood, they've seen much bigger profits. Now, you may disagree with that, but the reality is, for somebody like that, that's a small business in the township, when they say we've seen bigger profits, we're able to feed more of our kids, we mustn't lose sight of that and focus on, the people that are causing the trouble, the media, the politicians. Yes, these people are mischievous people, but the fact of the matter is we are failing our people, full stop.
Yes, Prof. But also, I think, Sharon, against the background of what Prof is actually saying is, we're talking about politicians, we're talking about the media as well, and even social media. And is this not a case of manufacturing consent? Because this is exactly what we are seeing is the target at this point in time are Black African migrants to a large extent. And also at the same time, in manufacturing this consent, how the world has actually bought into what they are seeing happening in South Africa, and also looking at South Africa in our position, and what does this actually mean for South Africa in terms of how we are being viewed by the rest of Africa. Obviously to a large extent, South Africa has been seen as a powerhouse economy on the African continent, as a big brother as well. But again, that whole view or that whole narrative about South Africa is now starting to emerge as a completely different picture.
Well, I think that we still have to hold on to the ethos and core values of our Constitution. That is respect for human rights, respect for human dignity of all who live in our country. And that is what South Africa is revered for globally. And from my experience of many people that come to our country, whether they're refugees or migrants, they come to our country not because they're going to get rich, or not because they're opportunistic about getting a job or taking someone's wife, but actually it's because we are well known for respecting basic human rights of human beings. And that's something to be proud of. And I think that that's something that is being damaged by the xenophobia. I think that but the big problem is the issue of the economy. And there is a report by one of the UN rapporteurs on human rights and looking at poverty in the world. And it's an incredible report that should be read by everyone. And it talks about this fetish about growth and growism, and how no matter what growth we have in South Africa, that is not going down to dealing with the inequalities. And that our economy, because of policies like GEAR, of privatization, of outsourcing, has led to the bloodbath of unemployed people in our country, people who have lost their jobs, never to get those jobs again. And then with a situation of 60% of young people who are unemployed, people who are graduates, lawyers, doctors, who should be contributing, giving back to our country, are walking the streets without a job. Now that's the crisis. And the solution has to be looked outside of just harping on about growing the economy and encouraging international investment. And the tools that this government can have and should have, which will look at beginning to redistribute wealth, is a wealth tax and a universal income grant. And that would make a significant contribution to alleviating the plight of millions who receive no social security, and where there's a black tax, there's generations who are dependent on a grant that a grandmother or a grandfather is receiving from the state, or a single parent who's getting support for her child as a single parent. And that is what's feeding, extended families and helping to get kids to school and assisting with people who are ill. So we need to be having those discussions, and we need to be asking every political party, when they come with their lies about blaming the migrants, to ask Herman Mashaba if he would support a wealth tax. Would he support a universal income grant in South Africa right now, given the serious crisis that we're facing with socioeconomic inequalities?
Yes, Sharon. And also, Julie, what we've seen as well, and when we're talking about political parties and how they've been responding to what we see around us. And I've seen a number of clips with the EFF Commander-in-Chief, Julius Malema, who has repeated this over and over, time and again. He's spoken about, he's given the example, you've chased away 50 Ghanaians out of the country, but have you created jobs for them? And this is the type of discussion that we should also be having as well, because I think the fact that one cannot run away from the fact, as Prof. Mthunzi speaks about, a third force operating in this country, because an organization cannot just mushroom and become all powerful within a matter of a few months. Somebody must be doing something. Somebody must be funding the organizations, transport, t-shirt, you name it, whatever it is that they are giving them. And again, when we talk about manufacturing consent, it's just so easy to convince the masses, particularly when we find ourselves in a dire situation economically in this country. You muted, Julie.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was smiling when Sharon was saying that would Herman Mashaba support a wealth tax and a redistribution and a universal basic income guarantee? I think we all know that he doesn't support those things. His party is one of the most incredibly pro-business parties that there is out there, right? And we're talking about businesses, we're not talking about small businesses. We mean, large corporations and the ultra wealthy. That's what we mean when we say pro-business. But there's an interesting saying that I'm going to share with you, which is that money is like manure. When it piles up, it stinks. But when you spread it around, it lets things grow, right? We really need a wealth redistribution of some kind in this country. And when you look at, say now, the end of the Great Depression in the US at the end of the 1920s, they had the greatest inequality in the world of all time. You had people like we have today in South Africa sitting on the street unemployed, waiting in queues for casual work, young men sitting everywhere, on the street unemployed. And what did they do? They mass mobilized and forced the government, forced President Roosevelt, who came in shortly afterwards, to enact massive social welfare, to tax the rich between 75% and 95%. Billionaires and multimillionaires were taxed. And that allowed them to create massive infrastructure, which in turn allowed them to create a jobs guarantee. Anyone and everyone who wanted to work in the US in the 1930s was guaranteed a job. So whether you were a nurse, a teacher, a construction worker, whatsoever, you were guaranteed work. And this led to what is known as the Great Golden Age of economic expansion in the US. And that is not even socialism, that's capitalism. It's not even the furthest that we could go with those kind of ideas. We could go even further than that. But we've lost sight. We've temporarily lost sight of the target. We need to keep our eyes on the target, which is we want economic justice in South Africa. We want everyone to have a life of dignity. And, we've had the dust thrown in our eyes with this divisive campaign that's going on. So those are the kinds of plans that really we should be talking about, and that a lot of people are talking about, but it makes it a little bit more difficult to organize and to mobilize when everyone is focused on the wrong target, and also when everyone is kind of now having suspicions about different people in their communities. So really, I think that's we need to be bold and have a vision for South Africa. And it's not going to come from the political parties. It's going to come from ordinary people on the ground, community leaders, trade unions, crisis committees, and everyone who is mobilizing for action, that we can actually have a life of dignity for ourselves and our children moving forward.
Well, absolutely, Julie. And also, I think, it's a scary thought in terms of what future our children and grandchildren are actually going to have if we see what is playing out today. And Prof. Loren, again, just coming to the whole question about, and I raised this question previously, what does this actually mean for South Africa in terms of our standing in the global community, on the African continent as well? And the reason why I'm saying is, there were some very, very clear signs that South Africa was going to be a target. When one recalls the President Cyril Ramaphosa's visit to the White House as well, the whole question surrounding white genocide had actually surfaced. And at that point in time, we already knew that South Africa was going to be targeted because of our position, particularly with regard to the ICJ case, because this is when South Africa really came under the radar, and the question of white genocide, and we knew that, this wasn't the case. So just looking at South Africa and our standing, because if we don't manage the situation well enough, if we don't put this issue to bed once and for all, a danger is lurking all around us.
South Africa, on many fronts, is at a very vulnerable place. It's vulnerable internally, it's vulnerable externally. Trying to win the support or the love of the United States at this point, I think, is futile and counterproductive. But there is one group out there that really likes what's happening in South Africa, which is the European Union, who looks down and sees South Africa as legitimating exactly what it's doing to African foreigners trying to come in. To say, look, it's not us, we're not racist, we're not xenophobic, even the South Africans are doing this to other Africans. So in that sense, South Africa might be winning some friends, but it's definitely hurting brand South Africa, it's hurting trade, it's hurting engagement, and it's hurting South Africans' moral authority within the continent. I think if we look back 15, 20 years, people look to South Africa for leadership, not just economically, but because of its human rights records, because of its quest for dignity, its quest for transformation. I think right now, whether you're in Mozambique, whether you're in Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Eswatini, Ghana, Ethiopia, South Africa is not to be trusted. This will make it harder for South African companies to invest. It's going to make it harder for ordinary people to trade. It's going to make things more expensive for ordinary people. And at the domestic level, the willingness to allow vigilante groups like March on March, like Tadula, like any of the others that we've seen, to gain such a strong foothold also means that it will almost be impossible to transform the township economies. They're not being controlled by the people. They'll be controlled by gangsters, by politicians who are corrupt, by police who are working for the highest bidder. If we want to transform domestically, if we want South Africa to lead in trade, investment, in its moral authority to try to make Africa a safer and more secure place for its residents, this sort of issue really must be addressed. And it must be addressed openly. It must be called what it is, that it is vigilantism, that it is xenophobia, and that it is being manufactured not only from outside, but from the very bottom, from local leaders working together with the global to try to undermine South Africa's potential progress.
Yes. Prof. Mthunzi, I'm just getting a message come through, and it speaks about the fragmented policies, whereby and South Africa being punished as a result of our position on Israel. And I know you touched on that briefly as well, but this is just a message that has come through from one of the listeners. Is South Africa being punished?
Well, I want to first go back to something that Julie said, economic justice. I think for me, that should be the focus. I think we can say all these things, right? But ultimately, economic justice for South Africans first, yeah? Because I don't want to get us to get lost in translation as to what is happening. As somebody who's served, you know that after the First World War, the ILO was born, the International Labour Organization. After the Second World War, the United Nations was born. And all those United Nations structures, and the ILO, as much as it's not part of the United Nations, it's part of the United Nations family. All those structures cater for Eurocentrism and Americanism. They don't cater for us. That's one of the biggest mistakes we've made as Africans and as South Africans, is to have things imposed on us. Policies. Our policies, for example, that relate to informality, where you have a country like South Africa that is 65% informal. You have a country like Nigeria that's 95% informal. And yet we are told we must transition everybody from informality to formality. That's messed up. All those things are messed up. We need to take those things and change them. But let's go back to the question you've asked about being punished. Yes, we are being punished. And we're being punished, I must tell you, personally, I don't have this worry that Professor Landau has about vulnerability. I don't have it. Because, we needed to get to this point. All the lies that have been peddled in the past, all the fake flaws that have been there, all the platforms that have been flawed, all the systems that have been flawed needed to be broken up. Now, all the mess that has been there, that was imposed on us, is being broken up, including the very issues that relate to Israel, that relate to Gaza. What is happening there is of proportions that are just on a level I don't even know how to describe, right? But it has taken the hypocrisy that comes from the United Nations. The United Nations, highly hypocritical organization that I've worked there. I can tell you things about, we can have a different program. I actually used to chair the business and human rights for all employers in the world at the same time as I was leading all the employers of the world in the ILO. I can tell you things that will make your hair rise. And for us who don't have hair, will even grow hair, right? So I don't want to spend my time talking about the United Nations, talking about hypocritical people that are not going to help us. I want to talk about us, South Africans. I want to talk about how we as South Africans are revered all over the world. People think we're the best thing that's ever happened. We are successful everywhere we go in the world. But here at home, we don't leverage each other. We don't work with each other. We attack each other. We don't make sure that we sit in a room. And yes, the politicians are taking full advantage of it. And they are to blame for the fragmentation that continues. But we are being punished by the US. Personally, I don't care for repairing a relationship with the US. I've always hoped for a day when we shall see that the US does not want anything good for us. And I'm happy that it's now happened, that the whole world can see how fraudulent those people are, how bad they are, the issues we are having now with BRICS and all of that. There's a new world that's being born. And one thing about South Africa, life started here in South Africa and in East Africa. We're the cradle of humankind. The one thing about us, we're always going to rise, but we need each other as South Africans. And forget all these labels, you know, the IMFs and the World Banks, very bad people, those, very bad people. Focus on who we are, focus on our resources, and let's do, for me, what Julie says is what I want. I'd like a conversation with Julie on this economic justice and how we see, how we unscramble this egg that's got us to this point. Being punished, yes, but it's not going to last. It's not sustainable. We're going to come back. We're going to come back strong. We just need to remember who we are as a people. We need to remember our identity as a people that are decolonized. We also need to know we've gone through too many traumas as a South African people. The colonization that we went through messes with our heads. We can't think straight. We need to think first South Africa, second African, and then broader as a citizen of the global village.
Well, Prof, I'm going to hold you to the discussion because one thing I desperately require is some hair growth myself as well. But just coming back to you, Sharon, and I think, you know, Prof just touched on so much, and, you know, we can also talk about Trump and his mega policies. Prof spoke about Eurocentric, but one thing, and Prof says, put South Africa first, but also looking at the African continent, because what we've seen also is we haven't seen any focus really, or a dwindling focus on Pan-African framing as well, and solidarity with the continent. We're not seeing that, and yet South Africa was a country that relied heavily, even during the apartheid era, on African support.
Absolutely, and I think that I think we should be very wary anywhere in the world, and we're seeing the emergence of the weaponization of nationalism, and that's a very, very worrying phenomenon. It's giving rise to right-wing parties, fascist parties in Europe, and of course Trump has emboldened xenophobes, anyone who trumps human rights, who he's struggles for equality and for economic justice, and this is the era in which we're living in, and it has influenced what is taking place in South Africa. And I would 100% agree with you on the point of Pan-Africanism. And, you know, I think there's so much we have to deconstruct around the migrant narrative. The common refrain is that when the ANC predominantly was in exile, they were confined to camps. They were not allowed to walk around, and they not like the migrants in South Africa. They don't respect our laws. They do whatever they can, again without substantiating any of this. And Mr. Matthew Pauza did a very interesting posting on social media, and he spoke about how when they were in exile, they actually organized the armed struggle, walking around with AK-47s, walking around with bombs in preparation in their struggle against apartheid. And that is not mentioned, and that is not considered of what states on the African continent allowed our struggle heroes to do in order for our fight against what is now a crime against humanity. And so I think there has to be a lot of deconstruction of the narrative around migration as well. I think we need to be thinking about migration and movement of people, and how opportunistically, given this narrow nationalism, that we are criminalizing the movement of people. And in that, we're criminalizing poverty. Because when we see these raids, these operations of local government, it is actually targeting poor people. It's very random. It doesn't only target foreigners. It is, as Julie said, it is the working class, which remains predominantly Black people in South Africa. And so we need to be wary about that. And I think I want to agree with Loren that there is a serious, the reason that we're seeing this hyped attacks on foreigners and the narrative as it's going, and it's going to get worse as we get to the elections in November, is because the most dysfunctional component of government is local government. Year after year, the Auditor General has issued, just now today, the city of Joburg has received a shocking, scathing, qualified Auditor General's report, and mismanagement and serious qualifications on unaccounted expenditure. And so, I think that the more that the local government has to hide, the greater the sound of why all our problems are because of the migrants. And I want to actually make an appeal that we consider seriously the dangers of these calls of our country to be rid of so-called illegal migrants, because the attack is on any foreign national who happens to be Black. If you saw what happened in KZN in a few weeks ago, 400 people, the Department of Home Affairs doesn't come in there to assist because they're afraid of their lives and they have fled their homes because they've been attacked by March on March, but goes to go and check their documentation. And all bar one person didn't have proper documentation as legitimized, recognized refugees in our country. And so this question of documentation, again, in whose interest is it to amplify that there are millions of people who are undocumented? There's no disaggregated mechanism of collecting data on movement of people. And if you look at research done by ACMS and others, there's actually a lot of circular migration, which is making a huge contribution to our economy. But that doesn't get spoken about because it's not in the interest of the mainstream media. And we haven't spoken about how the role of mainstream media in contributing to amplifying this disinformation. And so my appeal is that actually we should be calling on all faith-based organizations to open up their places of worship where there is going to be displacement because of this hatred against foreign nationals and this call for people to be out of our country by the 30th of June. We are very, very concerned about it. And I think it must be noted that in this violence, 2008, about over 65 people were killed, all of them Black people. In 2021, over 300 people lost their lives, all of them Black people. And I think that this should be of serious concern to our country, to our government, and to us as people living in this country on the continent. And we need to be talking about what are we going to do to actually take a stand to prevent this, these tiny formations of vigilante groups that because of amplification on social media platforms, gives the appearance that they are much bigger than they actually are.
Well, certainly, Sharon. In fact, I think I know we wouldn't have, covered every angle because this is such a huge discussion, actually, the media angle, and I spoke about manufactured content as well. But also, I think what you are saying is in terms of the local government elections, that is going to be the litmus test for us in this country, particularly at a volatile time like this. But just going through to the panel, starting with you, Julie, as well. In a minute, just a wrap up and your final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much for a very rich discussion, and it's really great to hear from every single fellow panelist, and it's really great to have this opportunity. We are in a absolute crisis, and we're in a war against the poor. Sharon mentioned the number of people who were murdered by previous waves of xenophobia. And a good number of those people were South African. A third of the people killed in the 2008 massacre were South Africans. And it's because whether you're a migrant or South African, you can't get your papers at Home Affairs. It's very difficult. So we have 4 million South Africans who don't have documentation. And what's going to happen when vigilantes start knocking on their doors or stopping them in the street? They're also going to be targets. And there's a lot of people who are scared to even speak out against these vigilante groups, and we can't have that. So if we want to move forward as a country, we really need to curb this this nonsense, this wave of vigilante, racist, tribalist violence that's going on, and get back to the things that really matter, getting justice for the majority of people living in our country.
Thank you, Julie. Prof. Loren?
I'll be quick. I mean, I agree. This is a war, or what we're seeing is a war against the poor. It's a war against democracy. It's a war against the rule of law. This is not about enforcing immigration laws. This is surrendering law on the ground to gangsters and to others, to international media, whatever it is that's driving these attacks. And I think it's a war against human dignity, right? It's dividing a country that very much needs a greater degree of social cohesion. It needs to solve these problems. We need to see solidarity between rich and poor. And instead, we are turning our attentions away from that and allowing leaders who have robbed the country for the last 20 or 30 years to get off scot-free.
Thank you for that, Prof. Mthunzi.
I think, all the solutions lie within us. We have the solutions. We must just find a way to move away from manipulation. We're being manipulated all the time, and the people who stand to gain from manipulations are the ones who lie to us all the time. They're the ones who failed our people for all these years. The poverty that we have in South Africa is unacceptable and undeserved. We have resources, we have human resources, we have mineral resources, we have land, we have everything in this country. What we need is to be able to get to the bottom of the problem. What's the bottom of the problem? Unemployment. What's the bottom of the problem? People are hungry. What's the bottom of the problem? People are poor. And until such time that we learn and understand that we must create relevant community solutions everywhere where we are, and be able to stop thinking we can have echo chamber solutions, because that can't be a solution. It's anachronistic in its formulation, right? That you keep saying things, and we must move beyond rhetoric. All we have is rhetoric from people who say one thing today and 4 years later say a different thing just because they want to survive politically. That's unacceptable. That's evil, actually. So for me, I believe that as South Africans, we need to rely on who we are. I want to go back. South Africa first. As much as I'm a global citizen and I've been everywhere in the world, I've been very blessed. One thing I've learned is that until as a people you learn to know that you come first, no one can do things better than you. Even as a single, as an individual, you are the best person to do something for you. As a country, we are the best people to do something for us. Then we can be good to everybody else. And I want to leave this point. We must not have things lost in translation. We have no problem with mobility of migration. We have no problem. This is important. We have no problem with protecting refugees. We have no problem with human rights, right? But we must focus. We must focus. We mustn't be manipulated and things are stretched just to satisfy other people.
Thank you for that. And Sharon, the final word from you.
No, I think I've had my say. Thanks. I agree with all the closing points of my fellow panelists, and thank you. It's been a very rich, constructive engagement, and I've been struggling with some of the antagonistic ways in which, as I said, mainstream media is managing this issue. So it was I appreciate your facilitation, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much as well. And I think, this obviously holds means a lot to us as well, because, we are built on the ethos of humanitarian journalism, and it is humanity that means a lot more to us. And I think this actually sets us apart from mainstream, and also, as an independent media house as well. This is what we need to focus on, and this is what we continue focusing on. But to all of you, to Sharon, Ekambaram, Julie Eccles, to Prof. Mthunzi Mdwaba, and also to you, Prof. Loren, Landau, we thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out for us right here on Salam Media and being part and parcel of this conversation tonight. All the best to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Well, that brings us to the end of the first part of tonight's edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi. You need to stay with us, because the next part is going to be equally robust, but also at the same time, it's an issue that has been a talking point for a very, very long time as well. Well, since the last, the flotilla convoy, since they landed at OR Tambo last week as well, but now we're talking about South Africa's GSF, which is the Global Samut Flotilla's land convoy, and their delegates have returned home. And tonight, they're going to be sharing their experiences with us. We have got Dr. Fatima Hendricks, Jessica Brieke as well, and we're also going to be joined by a third guest this evening. So all of that to come immediately after this. Stay with us.